Hello everyone. We are almost on the 1 year anniversary of the Naval Warfare update, which introduced a pretty big change to Foxhole. Not only were island regions introduced that showed us that the Foxhole world is actually cylindrical in shape, but we also got the knowledge on how to build and crew big ships. When the update went live, I thought I'll get into naval stuff spontaneously. But almost a year had passed and I've been on a ship just once and not as a part of the crew. It all seemed very unreachable, more separated than other activities in the game. Heck, even my regiment wasn't doing naval stuff. That combined with the recent surge of new players who were itching to do some naval warfare got me thinking that I should ask around. And what better way to learn about Foxhole than to ask other players? That's exactly what I did. The term naval warfare in Foxhole, what does that mean?
Generally, I would say naval warfare means the fact that you have combat and combat actions on the water. That could be a gunboat fighting another gunboat, or a gunboat attacking a freighter, like fishing, for example, which is a very big thing. Or a ship fighting another ship. It could be ship combat, it could be shore bombardment, and it all depends on in what state of the war you're in. But naval update or naval warfare generally just combat on ships. That's also barges and other fun things like kill hook. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do in naval warfare. Invading islands is also a thing, also part of it.
Well, to me, it depends on the time of war, but usually it's like fighting a big ship. Not necessarily like two big ships fighting, but a big ship is involved.
So naval warfare refers to warfare with boats, so whether that's barges and motorboats or gunboats or the large ships, so frigate, destroyer and submarines and battleships. And generally limited to certain distances of the water, but can be a really powerful tool.
Okay, does that include invasions or just ship battles or ship bombardment?
So landing forces are also an aspect of naval warfare. Again, can be really impactful, but of course limited to where there's water.
It doesn't really mean a whole lot because there isn't that much naval warfare, much more to naval assets at war. Like the encounters between ships are very far and few between. Very rare because the ships are too expensive to just throw away by fighting equal targets. Like the only things that will fight other things are submarines fighting destroyers and battleships, or submarines fighting frigates, because it's just 2 days of work is not worth yet throwing away. The whole idea of the warfare as we have experienced it, so we think it's the devs' vision of having these fights, is gunboats are very important in the larger operation of other large ships, be it by protecting submarines that are surfaced, be it by screening for frigates or destroyers, or be it by screening for battleships. The issue is not enough people know that, so you don't really get the screens needed for actual engagements larger than just bombing some poor sub that's on the shoreline.
For us, that could pretty much mean anything involving naval combat, pretty much from QRFing enemy boats to sending boats of our own to attack. It could be anything from shore bombardment, escorting our own convoys, clearing the map of enemy invasions, anything along that realm. Anything that has to do with combat involving boats on the water would entail naval combat to us, I guess.
Is naval warfare limited to island regions? Where are the hotspots for naval combat?
Oh, the hotspots for naval combat? I mean, it's not limited to the island regions. I mean, if you look at War 115, where a lot of ship combat has been seen in Endless Shore, Alloy's Bride, the Clastra, and Marvin Hollow, all these ships doing shore bombardments in the middle regions, pretty much. It really opened up. I mean, most of the combat that I have seen is happening around front lines or frontline axes, but they also happen in backline regions where submarine tries to infiltrate and destroys some ships which are parked.
Well, it is definitely not limited to the island regions. I mean, personally, I've used it in the interior as well, like at big ships like destroyers and that. Hotspots. I would say currently this war, the Wardens have been attacking a lot through Tempest and through Fisherman's Row. So I'd say they're the hotspots at the minute, and Stemmer Landing as well.
So naval warfare isn't limited to the island regions at all. In fact, my group that I do naval warfare with, which is combinations of the regiments Fears and FMAT, actually prefers to avoid the islands and support the main land war with fire from frigates or battleships. We do a lot of work on the coastline, bombarding defences and enemy positions to help our ground forces push up. But islands are also a big part of naval warfare. They're a great spot for sea battles, and they can be really helpful to hold.
There's certainly naval hotspots. Every war, there's naval hotspots. For us, it's the Collie backlines, where we go hunt. But the islands can be somewhat of a hotspot. But there is no, like, you can go anywhere in a ship, right? You can go bomb in you can even drive all the way up here to go bomb something. But bridges are the concern for that. So you can't really. You can go deeper into enemy territory using bridges, but if you lose the bridge, you lose your ship. So it's very, how do you say it? It is, however dangerous and however fun as the captain wants to make it. So if the captain wants to go very deep in enemy territory, you can, because it's mobile artillery. I mean, who wouldn't want to fire a big gun behind enemy lines?
Could you just elaborate for people not understanding the connection between ships and bridges?
Pretty much the only thing that stops a large ship is another large ship or a bridge. If you have a large ship inbound in your position or you are going somewhere, the bridge will always have to be blown. If the enemy blows the bridge, you can no longer go through and you're stuck. So say you're 2 bridges deep in enemy territory, they blow the bridge behind you, you're effectively become stuck.
For us, that could pretty much mean anything involving naval combat, pretty much from QRFing enemy boats to sending boats of our own to attack. It could be anything from shore bombardment, escorting our own convoys, clearing the map of enemy invasions, anything along that realm. Anything that has to do with combat involving boats on the water would entail naval combat to us, I guess. Not the island regions. I would say it's a pretty common misconception that a lot of the naval combat is just in the island regions. While we do a fair amount of naval combat in the island hexes, I would say that a lot of it also goes on in the Calastra, in Farinac Coast, in Stone Cradle. A lot of the inner hexes also see some support as well. especially considering that those inner hexes tend to be a little bit easier for our side to hit without getting QRF'd into oblivion. So a lot of our operations that we do would tend to be in the island hexes, but for a lot of solo captains who don't have a task force behind them, they're going to be operating in the inner hexes where it's safer.
How long after a war begins until we see a ship?
Usually a rule of thumb would be that if a gunboat is on tier 3, tier 4, then you can expect in the first 5 days to have one. But it also starts with barges. You can, at the beginning of the war, you can hop into a barge, go with your friends, invade an island, fight between barges, which also is a valid type of combat. Like a good barge can kill a gunboat, and vice versa.
And how about bigger ships?
Bigger ships, I would need to check. I personally
Just a
feel like
rough
in the
estimate.
second week of the war, I would say. Grouping those ships, like getting all the rare metals for everything, takes a lot of time and a lot of effort.
So yeah, large ships you don't tend to see until about 7 to 10 days into the war, really, because they need to get the dockyard tech, and then ship's tech, which is I think tier 5 and 6 technology. So yeah, you won't really see ships before day 7 or so, and it will take until day 10 for factions to really start producing combat ships.
The first ships you can see like 6 hours after the large ship's tech, because there's regiments that stockpile their rare metals. The issue is, how do they drop? How do the rare metals drop? If they drop a lot during a war, you'll see large ships very fast after the tech. If they don't, it can be 2 or 3 days after, like 115, for example, where the rare alloy drops or rare metal drops were pretty bad. So it took 2 to 3 days for everyone to get enough to build ships. Well, obviously this all depends on the on how the tech is set, but generally, the consensus is between 7 and 10 days.
Pretty much the day that they are teched, within about, I would say, a good 5 or 6 hours is when the very first large ship rolls off a dry dock. Granted, this does depend a little bit on how long it takes our own version of Howell County Naval Shipyards to get their production facilities and everything online. But typically it's the same day that we have ships teched. Typically it's about usually a week or 2 into the war, usually roughly 8 or 9 days.
How approachable is naval warfare to solos or smaller clans?
It is pretty hard for solo players, I would say. Since the closest thing a solo player can get to as this moment, since a ship needs like 20 people, a ship needs roughly 20 people, like a frigate, for example, needs 20 to 25 people. Battleship, we're talking about 30 people, if you don't want to die. So I would say the closest thing a solo person can get is a gunboat, where he can go with a few randoms and do some fun stuff like shelling a bridge, destroying some freighters, generally just being a menace, fighting other ships. Or if they decide to go on a big boat, then they would need to join or subject themselves to the commands of the ones that are running this ship.
Okay, and how about smaller clans? Yeah?
For smaller clans, as I touched upon it, a ship is a big investment. I mean, there is some clans that are offering their dry dock for smaller clans to build their ship. They usually operate under the thing that you bring the rare metals, which is the hardest part about building a ship. Like if you bring the rare metals that you need to build the alloys, then it was, I would say, easy for a smaller clan of like 5 to 10 people to get a ship of any size. The other problem would then be to crew this ship, where they would need to ask randoms or another clan for help. So the only thing really keeping smaller clans and solo players from playing with big ships is the crew requirement.
Advice for players wanting to get into naval warfare.
I mean, they can ask clans which do this, which do naval warfare, for some help, or if they could like go with them, talk to the veterans. But generally, it's mostly grab a gunboat, grab some people, and you learn it. It's not that hard.
Join if you're a colonial. Join the CCF server. That would definitely be a good way to start getting into ships and that. Because every day I would say there's big ships call for crews and that. Yeah, so the CCF server stands for Combined Colonial Fleet. It's where most regiments go through to buy ships, and where most go and muster crews through there if they can't crew a ship. It's not a regiment, it's just a big group of people that work together on it.
So that really depends on how far into naval warfare you want to get. Solos and randoms and smaller clans can very easily do gunboats, but with large ships, the resource requirements and crew requirements make it quite difficult for randoms or smaller clans to run them on their own, especially the Battleship, which requires a crew of about 30 to be effective. So smaller groups would have to rely on getting random players in, but then you run into the issue of no one has worked together before, no one knows how you want to run the ship, and it can work, but it's very chaotic and very difficult to make it work effectively. So you really need naval warfare is really aimed at the larger regiments that can do a full ship mostly on their own or on their own completely.
Okay, any advice for new players wanting, not only for new players, but for players wanting to get into naval warfare?
So getting into naval warfare is pretty simple. You just need to really spawn on a large ship that you see somewhere out in the ocean that's moving around. So basically, it's one that looks like it's on an operation. Ask the crew that's already on board what they need help with. Typically, you'll be assigned to damage control, which is repairing hulls and removing water from the ship. And that's a very easy task that a lot of crews get just random people on board to do. So, yeah, very accessible. And then if you work with a group multiple times, you might be able to eventually start working your way up to like firing a gun or other roles.
Unfortunately, not approachable enough. As ride-alongs, it is very approachable because there's a lot of regiments out there, like ours, or like Telephone, or a few others, that take new people. That take people have no experience whatsoever. Just, hey, there's a frigate leaving, there's a battleship leaving, come join it. That happens. Doesn't happen enough, but it does happen. To own a large ship, though, that's just not attainable for smaller regiments because you need a pretty big infrastructure to even start producing the stuff for it, unless you can work together with another regiment that can store your rare alloys and then go buy off of HNS, which is also a good possibility.
Okay, advice for players wanting to get into naval warfare.
Either find a regiment that is specialized in it, or join a regiment that is friends with one of them, or become friends with naval regiments. Like, we work together with a lot of people that don't do naval, and they send us people that do like naval every time we need crewmen.
I would say it's very approachable. Our naval side of things is very beginner friendly. We always love the opportunity to have new people on board and show them around ships and let them get a feel for naval combat. As a solo or as a small clan, it's pretty easy to jump into the action. Granted, it can be a little difficult to make a meaningful impact when you're on your own, because a lot of the time you're not really coordinating with the other naval forces in the region, and as such, you're a lot more vulnerable to, well, just getting killed. Naval combat tends to evolve very quickly on the water, uh, especially when you're in a small group. You can go from being free and clear and nothing in sight to all of a sudden you have 6 or 7 ships bearing down on you. So, as a solo, it can be hard to find ways to be effective, but it's very easy to jump on board pretty much any other regiment's ship and they'll teach you the ropes, they'll usually put you on a position, and from there it's up to you if you want to join with them or stay solo.
What are the most and least used naval vessels?
I mean, the barge is really not used as much as it should be, but that's just me talking. Since the barge is fun and amazing, since it was one of the only naval vehicles before the big naval update came out. Then I would say the battleship as well, since it's such a big investment. It's also critically underused. But other than that, I feel generally that naval assets are a bit underused on the Warden side.
Okay, so what's the most used?
I would say the submarine and the frigate.
I would probably say the most for colonials is destroyers, and for wardens I would also say it's frigates most likely. And the least used is probably bowheads.
What's the problem with bowheads?
They're just not really worth the price. They're only kind of alright if you're doing island larping.
Well, the least used naval vessel is easily the bowhead. Its use in general is just questionable because you can often achieve the same result with the same number of players in iron ships, or just its effect can be very easily achieved just without it. But for most used, probably the frigate or destroyer, because they're very versatile ships that can be used to both support the land war with gunfire, attack other large ships also with the guns, and hunt submarines. Submarines are also pretty widely used. They're very good at hunting enemy large ships, but less versatile as they can't really affect the ground war. Except for the Colonial submarine can with its 120mm gun, but it's very vulnerable to attack while doing so, so it's not often the most useful. And battleships are used a bit less than that because of just a massive cost and crew requirement makes it quite difficult for most regiments to field one, especially with the requirement to have anti-submarine support, because battleships can't really do anything against a submarine.
The most used one, though, is the best ship out there, the frigate, which it will end a lot of good pushes. However, the long hook needs to be more used in its role as it was intended.
Could you explain on that?
So the long hook is for the new players. It looks kind of like a fishing trawler, which is pretty much just a mobile base. You drop it somewhere, people can hammer little boats out, and they can go and invade. It's you can spawn on it, and you use it to do naval landings. The only problem is you only see 1 or 2 naval landings a war because people just don't use them for that. People use them as mobile anti-ship guns instead of the intended role, which it is very good at. Like, we've taken an island and many lands with naval landings, which can be doable if you don't just yeet it away.
Most used by far is going to be the destroyer. Our destroyer is just an absolute jack of all trades. It's extremely flexible, and as such, most regiments will prioritize getting a destroyer before anything else. Least used would by far be the bowhead. There's just not much use for it for us this war, since we don't own the island hexes like Tempest Island and Fisherman's. So bowheads are practically non-existent on our side this war.
Okay, what is the problem with bowheads?
Bowheads tend to be a worse version of an iron ship, I guess. They're mainly for transporting large amounts of resources and for helping with scooping the islands. But since we really haven't had a need to move large amounts of resources from the islands, they've been pretty much neglected in favor of iron ships and barges.
What is the role of a battleship? Does it impact the course of a war?
What is the role of a battleship? I mean, the battleship's primary role would have been or would be to fight other ships and provide a massive amount of artillery, mobile artillery. And it does impact battlefields a lot. Like, one battleship can turn the tide of. I mean, it's pretty fair to say that the naval assets used in War 115 in Alloyds, Reavers, and Endless Shore pretty much held that region, like same in Roundwale and Clastra, like the whole East. The whole East simply fell because of how the naval vessels have been used. So I would pretty much say that a battleship or generally naval assets that are very efficiently used or sometimes just thrown away or thrown into a seaport and then die are a game changer. Like, it is a very powerful tool if used correctly.
It depends on if it's used correctly or not, but battleships are very good for shore bombardment, and for fighting surface ships, but it is very weak against submarines.
Okay, does it impact the course of a war?
It's hard to say definitively, but if used correctly, it very much can take a whole hex with support from ground as well.
So yeah, battleships can be hugely impactful assets when used correctly. They are absolutely devastating to anything on the land within the range of their guns. They can single-handedly obliterate most of the defenses in an entire hex if the hex permits. So hexes with lots of water like Terminus, the island hexes, Morgans are very good areas to field a battleship, but they can't really impact the land war beyond 200 or so meters, so somewhat limited. And then for the naval warfare side of things, again, battleships are hugely impactful. A well-crewed battleship will dominate a destroyer or frigate just because of the sheer firepower and durability difference, but they are vulnerable to submarines.
Yes and no. A battleship with a good crew and good timing can change the whole tide of the war. I mean, us single-handedly stopped Port Rhyme pushes 4 nights in a row with a battleship, where 420s was just pushing, and you show up and you stop them in their tracks because now all of a sudden you got 6 150 guns on top of the people that are trying to hold out, which not only is a huge morale boost for those on the ground, but it's also a huge morale drop for those being bombed. So yeah, a battleship is very important and unfortunately way too expensive to effectively field. Therefore, you don't see them a lot, but when they are fielded, it changes the whole dynamic of that fight.
Okay, so what is the role of a battleship? Just like fire support?
In our doctrine, it's fire support, but you can also use it to hunt other ships. It's just way too vulnerable by itself, though. So you do need. I don't mean it can die easily, but if a submarine creeps up on you, you will never see it because you don't have radar, you don't have sonar, you don't even have ways to fight subs. So, yeah, you always do need a frigate or a sub with you to protect you from those unseen threats that could end your. So yeah, you need numbers to do large ships.
I would say yes. Battleships tend to be a rallying point for a task force. Whenever a battleship is deployed, that's where other forces go. even if they're not in coordination with the battleship, just seeing a battleship moving forward doing an operation, that's usually what we'll go to. They're very impactful on the front line. They are quite good at wiping fortifications. So as a result, they tend to be what we protect, because when a battleship goes forward, it means we're about to take something.
Okay, so it's safe to say that it does impact the course of a war.
Yes, very much so. I mean, battleships being deployed successfully very much impact the course of the war, because a single battleship being deployed in the right spot can turn a victory point. So they're very highly impactful, and we do our absolute best to make sure that every battleship that is deployed has a full escort.
How disposable are ships, and how long does a ship last on average?
Like, does it happen at the beginning of when the ships are attacked? Then yes, it hurts. It really stings. But the later we are in the war, like I think day 28 or day 29 is when the last tech is researched. Usually. So after that, every field spawns rare metals, so it's gonna be easy to produce ships now. The state of how the economy is. So I would say the most hurtful thing about losing a ship is the blame game. Like, people will blame each other that why did we lose this? You're at fault. And I think it's more of a thing that happens between the people than the ship is lost. Okay, cool, whatever. But how the people react to it is the thing that really hurts about losing a ship. I would say it takes 10 to 12 man hours to get all the rare metals you need for a ship. And that's a rough estimate for, like, from what I've seen. It takes 1-2 days of scooping to get a ship.
On average, how long does a ship?
How long a ship lasts, it all depends on how much you use it. I mean, in the Naval Update War, Warden Navy hasn't lost a single ship, and they had it from the day it came out to the end of the war. Which, I mean, is kudos to them. But a ship depends on how you use it. Like, if a ship is only there to sit in a river because you take it out once, then it gets hurt and you drive back, and then it just stands there for like 5 days, then it does stay there. But usually, if you know what you're doing and don't overcommit, then a ship could last you a whole war, even if you take it out daily. So it all depends on how good you are as a crew and how lucky you get. Because if you're like across the border and there is a gunboat swarm waiting for you because they saw you in intel and they just ambush you, then yeah, I mean, if you survive, perfect. But if you don't survive, then yeah, happened. So I would say it all depends on how good the crew is. Like, a ship can last 2 hours because you used it to drive up to a port of Rhyme, rammed it in, and died, or it could last a week.
Well, it kind of depends on the skill of the crew. It is very much down to crews how long the ship survives, and how many missions it goes on. It's always good to do training missions beforehand, before going out into open waters and that, so then people can get familiar with their sea positions and that.
So the ships, frigates destroyers and submarines are somewhat disposable. You will feel a loss if your ship is sunk, but you can farm the resources for one and get another one out fairly quick. Battleships, on the other hand, that you feel their loss a lot. They cost a lot more resources, and yeah, it takes a fair bit of time to replace them, even with a large scale operation. you will feel the loss of a battleship a lot.
And how long does a ship last on average?
On average, hard to say, because you can have a battleship, or well, any ship, survive from as soon as it's built to the end of the war. My group's had that happen a few times, but then you can also have a ship only survive a few hours if you get unlucky on your first patrol.
So for us, a ship normally lasts the whole war. We've lost in 115. We have lost 2 frigates. We had 6, so it was they're not very disposable, but depending on what you dispose it of with it while disposing of it, it can be beneficial to the faction. But the math is very obfuscated on that. Like it depends on, am I willing to lose this one ship for 2 dry docks, for example, or am I willing to lose this one ship for against a battleship? It all depends on that part.
Not at all disposable. I would say there are some regiments that use them disposably, but that's just because they have the manpower to throw it rare grinding all day. But for most regiments, the priority is going to be on saving their ship. They're not very easy to get on our side. Typically, depending on the size of the regiment, these are things that we tend to hold on to as long as possible. Depending on the regiment is usually how long that ship lasts in combat. It can average between, I would say, 3 deployments to 0 deployments, and it's just dying in harbor if they parked it somewhere poorly. Which several of our ships have already been lost to partisans this war, so anywhere from 0 to 3 deployments, I would say, is how long they typically last.
Favorite boat, ship, and why?
The favorite. I would say the gunboat. I mean, if we talk about every naval vehicle, it would be gunboat. Because you can use it for the whole war. The day it's tacked, you can use it. I can use it to be a gremlin and win a bridge battle, because bridges are in the water, and every water can be accessed by a gunboat. Or I can use it to go into the enemy lines and kill their iron ships. Or I could be helping Battleship by scouting ahead with a small gunboat, so I make sure that they won't be attacked by a gunboat swarm or by some enemies waiting for an ambush. So yeah, I would say the gunboat is my most favorite naval vehicle. Also because it doesn't need a lot of crew.
That's definitely a difficult question to answer, because I have never been on a battleship. I've only been on destroyers, submarines. Yeah, so I'd say my favorites that I've been on so far is a destroyer. Honestly, I just find it fun to play.
Me, it's between the frigate and battleship, because I've spent a lot of time on both of them, and we've had very highly successful battleships and frigates. Well, they're a lot of fun to use. Big guns, lots of durability, and you can have a huge impact on a front if played well. In the update war, our battleship was doing daily QRF missions to Morgan's Crossing, where they bombard the colonial push and basically keep the hex safe. But yeah, it's really hard for me to decide between those two, because they just had a lot of fun with both of them.
So my one my one is the battleship. It's just because I love differentiated spotting. So that means engaging multiple targets at once, and only the battleship has the kind of power that can do that effectively, and it creates just so much destruction and chaos. It's amazing. But unfortunately, it's gate kept, so otherwise the frigate if I can't get to the battleship.
Definitely the destroyer. Our destroyer is just so extremely flexible. It could be used for a multitude of roles. It could be used as invasion support, QRF, escort. You can use it with a whole horde of gunboats and keep the resupply for those gunboats on board the destroyer. You can use it as a long hook and park it on a beach and have your team spawn on it. It's just way too flexible of a role as a ship, and I feel that it's the best one on our side, since it's just adaptable to pretty much any situation on the water.
How did the introduction of ships change Foxhole? Meaning, if people stopped making ships, would anybody notice?
I mean, if we stopped making submarines and battleships and frigates, then I would think that people would not really that most people wouldn't really know. I mean, actually, I think they would, because then they wouldn't be needing to run away from whenever a battleship decides to show up in one of the rivers, or a destroyer shows up in one of the rivers. So, I mean, I would honestly say it would have an impact, but it wouldn't be as bad as if suddenly tanks would disappear. Like, imagine a war without tanks.
Yeah, okay, how much do you think that the introduction of larger ships change Foxhole?
I mean, it changed it in a way that there is now more things to do and more things to worry about. I mean, the introduction of ships also introduced the way of border travel. Like, you can go from Fisherman's Row into Tempest Island, which opened up the map a lot. But it also introduced a rather, no, I wouldn't say boring, but a rather tedious thing or mechanic, that is getting these big ships, which should be used in the coastal regions, into the middle of the map. Like, if you park a battleship in the baths, then you will be never you will never take it, since of how the region looks like. Or if you put a ship in Stonecradle, then you can just use it as a mobile artillery to keep Buckler Sound alive. So it brings new challenges, but it also brings new approaches. Like, you can use a long hook to drive around and invade a seaport, since the coastal gun doesn't shoot at the long hook. It can just be there in the middle of the enemy town and spawn in and grab a gun and start shooting.
I think people would definitely notice. Like, I mean, I didn't play when Naval first came out because I hadn't played for like 6 months at that point, because I'd heavily burnt myself out. But I'm actually just coming back, so this is only like my second war that's actually lasting a little bit that has Naval involved in it. But I mean, it changed the game completely. Like, they added 6 new regions in that, which were never there before. Yeah, so ships, it's basically mobile, very mobile artillery that can reach across the whole, like, most of the regions, which I find is a game changer. Like, one destroyer coming into like a middle hex through a river can completely change the tide of like that whole hex.
Yeah, you definitely notice, because a lot of key areas on the map are within range for a ship to bombard from the water, and with the impact of ships, you really have to think about them, if there's even a possibility that someone might bring a ship to where your position is, because again, large ship shelling is hugely impactful. You can really devastate a front line. I think the best example of that was War 114 in Terminus, where our battleship did daily operations there for about 10 days, and by the time we were finished, most of the defences in the hex had been killed, and we were able to launch a naval invasion to take the whole hex.
Yes and no. That's a very hard to answer question, because the people would notice, but not the average Joe. The average Joe, which is, they're still going to be fighting. They're still going to be pushing the front. They're still going to be driving around in their tank. But the naval larpers, they will definitely notice, because if we only have barges and gunboats left again, it's not going to be the same. I did create a place for LARP. Definitely, that is very important in this game. I mean, that's how you create your fun. But no, it changed the power dynamic. It just back in the day, you used to have your little gunboat with like a 120. You had like 12 shells. You would go lob your 12 shells, and you would be done for the day. Now you have a frigate that has 200 shells, that is mobile artillery that can spot up to 200 meters away. Like you can, like it just changed the whole dynamic. You're not safe anymore near water. Like when you're near water, you're in danger. Like you can get absolutely obliterated at any minute, as long as ships are attacked, of course. So yeah, it definitely changed the power dynamic.
I would say the introduction of ships has had a major impact on pulling people from the front lines, especially when you start to get a lot of the bridge battles and stalemates, where things just tend to draw out for a long time. That's when naval support tends to be called in, and it makes a huge difference. A destroyer parked in the right place on a coastline can turn a stalemate that's been going on for a week into a push. So if we did lose ships, if ships were not there, I believe we'd see a lot more of that stalemate similar to War 115, where there's just constant back and forths, a lot of bridge battles, and just not much territory really being gained, since a lot of the effort to break those stalemates just comes from the water.
Okay, and if people stopped making ships, would anybody notice?
Oh, absolutely, yes. For a big part, you would see a lot less iron ships on the water because gunboats are just too dangerous. There'd be a lot less use for the island hexes, since those typically don't have a refinery or factories on them. Last war was kind of an exception, but we'll mark that off. But typically the island hexes, without ships, are going to be pretty much empty. There's no point. Frontline hexes would stall a lot more. I think we would notice that as well.
Things that you would like to see improved.
I mean, the most frustrating thing about naval is the amount of scooping and resources you need to get it. This is one of the turnoffs for me. But honestly, the most tedious part about ships is the queue system. That's honestly the biggest issue I have, because of how many people you need for the big ship. It is hard to sometimes get into certain frontline hexes, and once you're there on the front line, you're in the battleship, you start shooting at whatever target you have, but then you don't have enough people to attack this target on land. So the best thing the devs could do, help naval or make naval better, would be to increase the queue capacity for when a big ship is somewhere. Like hopping borders into a queued region with a battleship, nearly impossible. Everybody of the battleship needs to hop out into the water, cross one by one, and then the battleship is on the other side, or the battleship is still stuck in border queue, and suddenly there is some enemies attacking, but the whole crew is on the other side already, waiting for the battleship, and that's one of the things that's just not nice, or it just takes away the enjoyment.
I'd like to see a more improved communication system. I think it can get quite hectic, and it's difficult to use it without using other applications like TeamSpeak or Skype or whatever, like Discord and whatever. Because it's very difficult. If it wasn't for Discord, it would be very difficult to organize a whole destroyer crew. Yeah. So like, if I'm in a destroyer, then like without Discord, the whole communications would be completely blocked up by damage control, and no one would be able to get orders out. No one would be able to hear anything.
So yeah, there's a few things about large ships that could use some work. Mainly bucketing can be really frustrating because once compartments fill up, like you can see it in this frigate here, if this middle compartment was to have a major hole and start filling up, you'd only get able to close the bulkheads at the front and back, and you'd only be able to climb out to the ladder, so it's really slow and difficult. It would be nice if there was a pump system or something that removed water at a certain rate, and maybe you bucketed water into the pump instead of having to climb out on deck. It'd just be a quality of life change that also makes a bit of sense, because most, real ships tend to have people bucketing out. And there's a few other things that would be worth changing. I think that submarine torpedoes need to be looked at a bit, because right now, even when you patch the hole, it still leaks at a rate that makes it almost impossible to control. In most of the operations I've been in where we've taken a torpedo hit, we haven't even bothered repairing the compartment, and we've just returned to base with a damaged compartment, and after we sealed up the bulkheads. And yeah, that's a bit of a frustrating mechanic, because it means that a single torpedo hit can completely take you out of the fight.
I would definitely like to see a ship in between the frigate destroyer and the gunboats, so that smaller regiments can also have a place in this naval warfare update. Because, as I said, like, gunboats are very important, but there's just something missing between the gunboat and the frigate for people to feel like they're actually part of something. Which, yeah, that they would just the feeling part of something is very important on ships, and I feel like the smaller regiments don't get that joy, and hence they don't play the naval update.
I would personally like to see boat physics improved. There's, for example, some issues with boats being launched into the air on a gun when a gunboat drives under them. This happened to our destroyer just a couple deployments ago. Very dangerous in combat, and it's something that I feel could be very easily adjusted by just fixing the hitbox on the gunboat. Another thing that I would mention is the bowhead. The bowhead definitely needs some love. The devs are working on the bowhead and improving its functionality with some kind of feature that they're hinting at, which sounds like modular ships, which would be cool, but I also feel like a big factor to naval combat right now is torpedoes. Torpedoes are way, way, way overpowered, and I believe should be balanced a little bit better. And we should have more small boat options like gunboats, but with different armaments, like maybe a torpedo boat or a depth charge boat or something like that.
Would you think that there should be a naval chat in-game, or there is no point since ships are usually a clan thing?
Not really. No, I don't think so. Most of the naval things are already being discussed on dedicated Discord servers or in generally, like, if you need a crew for a ship, then you just spam the intel chat with need crew, need crew, need crew, need crew for battleship, need battleship, need battleship, and then the people just join in. Some things need to be put on a third party because of how much coordination you need. It is you can only do so much coordination in world chat.
Yeah, I think that would be a very good addition, because the last time that I was out, I actually had to get someone to get me in a squad with another DD captain, which took a while, and it was quite difficult to get.
Naval chat could be useful, because often coordinating between regiments that are looking to do naval can be really good for an operation, and would be a good extra way to coordinate with others. But I don't know how much of an impact adding a naval tab would do, because in that case they could have changed their chat to just intel chat, but so I don't know if that would actually make a difference adding naval.
It would be nice because now everything goes through third-party groups like the Swedish Naval Institute or other naval recruitment groups. But naval chat will be very important so we can keep track of fleets without losing the chat in the red or blue chat because that happens a lot, unfortunately. Yeah, to give an example, 2 wars ago we were hunting a submarine and we lost it. We didn't know where it went. We asked 3 times in chat. It got answered, but right at that moment, a town got taken. So the big F spam happened, and we didn't have time to read where the submarine was. Therefore, it got a torpedo off at us before we found it again. And yeah, it was. We made it out. We made it home, but we could have also not taken that torpedo. And one, if we had like a specific place, we could post those kind of things.
I think yes, naval chat would be a good idea because a lot of the time we're just using intel chat to coordinate our naval actions. And that can very easily be lost in the chaos. And plus, you have the entire front line who's also using intel chat to respond to enemy pushes, tank rushes, logistics being cut, etc. So I believe a naval chat would be a great idea to be able to help coordinate on the water instead of just flooding intel chat with everything.
Warden or Colonial Navy, which is better?
It's hard. It's hard. It's a Warden. It depends. It depends.
Okay, now try and elaborate a bit.
I mean, if we look at how the things like Wardens have a better submarine, they have a better gunboat. They have, generally speaking, I mean, if you look at the big ships, then Colonials have the edge with the Battleship and the Destroyer. But if you look at the smaller ships, like the submarine and the gunboat, I would say the Wardens.
Colonial. I find colonial ships are just better, and then also I think we work together better rather than just like individual regiments using like all their big ships at once or whatever. So I think it's better, like it's a better like kind of vibe, I guess.
Okay, yeah, ships wise, I think they're about equal to be honest. Both have their advantages and disadvantages, but overall the strength of the ships is fairly similar. Exception might be the colonial submarine, which is a bit of a bust. Very, very bulky and slow. Yeah, overall they're pretty balanced.
Warden, because of our subs. Our subs are just superior to their subs, and therefore we can engage more effectively. Other than that, their surface fleet is very good. So if you put their sub next to ours, their sub is nearly twice the size in length, and it is half the size larger. Therefore, it's very hard to turn. It's very hard to get going. It's very hard to dive with. And in a way, it is even more high skill based than our sub. Which our sub is hard, but their sub is even harder, and therefore they cripple their whole fleet with that.
That's I mean, my gut answer would be Colonial, but that's a hard one because Wardens really have us beat on submarines. When it comes to submarines, Wardens are taken over. Like, we can't even compete. When it comes to destroyers, yeah, we win those. When it comes to battleships, same thing, we win those. So my gut reaction says Colonial, but Warden still have some W's in the submarine department.
Yeah, other people have touched upon the same thread right there. Could you explain what is the problem with the submarine?
The Warden submarine is only supposed to hold 15 torpedoes, but there's currently an exploit that allows it to overstock up to 24 torpedoes, which allows them to, with just 2 submarines, take out most large ships, even if they're anchored. So, they're also much smaller than our submarines. They're a tiny bit more maneuverable. And our submarine is just not nearly as good in combat, since it's a lot bigger of a target and a lot easier to hit with depth charges, sea mines, and torpedoes, where the Naki has the advantage of being a smaller target.
I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you've learned something. But I especially hope that this video demystified naval warfare a bit. Making this video gave me an opportunity to do a training mission, and now I'm qualified to operate a ship. But with this comes a realization that in order to get into naval, you have to find your way into the Warden or Colonial Naval Discord server. There is a glaring communication issue, not only with how other players find ships and crew, but as well as ship-to-ship communication. If not for Discord, the whole of naval warfare would be almost impossible. My 2 cents is that there should be a communications role on a ship, where they could use voice chat to talk to other ships, even talk in local voice, but with an amplified range and to simulate loudspeakers on ship. Introduction of naval warfare opened the door to a huge potential yet to be tapped in its entirety. The complexity of crewing a submarine reminded me of Barotrauma. Submarine gameplay design seems like a nice flex from the developers. Look at how good we can make this. And it is. Just compare it to being in a tank, even a super heavy tank. Every other aspect of Foxhole seems like an arcade mode just for funsies, and this in turn is the problem, making it almost inaccessible to most Foxhole players. Even experienced frigate or destroyer crewmen don't know how to operate a submarine. I don't think the devs are done with naval stuff. There will be more changes for sure. They've built a strong foundation, and everyone that gets into naval is enjoying themselves a lot. With that, I bid you adieu. Also, thanks for everyone who answered the call for the interview. Don't forget to check out my other Foxhole interviews, and if you wish to see the raw unedited footage of the interviews, lots more interesting information and banter, you can get it on my Ko-fi page. Till next time, you can find me on my Discord server or on Twitch. See ya.